So, what a difference a day makes. It has been an absolutely crazy 24 hours in the world of Nintendo and video games because, as we all know, this huge story broke just last night about Nintendo possibly seriously looking at releasing an upgraded Switch next year in 2019. So this is an insane story, an insane piece of news. There is a lot to talk about and dissect. And of course, I don't get to make videos like Johnny on the spot, unfortunately, like a lot of other really great YouTubers get to do. The night that this broke, which again was last night as of the recording of this video, within an hour, like a lot of people had a bunch of videos out talking about it right away. I mean, it happened so quick, which I thought was great, but I was like, I just don't get to make videos that way. So by the time you watch my video, it's going to be like 2 days later, and it's probably the trillionth video on the same topic that you guys have seen. But I think what's interesting about a conversation and a piece of news like this is that the more you kind of hear from different people and get their different opinions, the more you kind of get to put the picture together. And I think that hearing different angles and perspectives and opinions from many different people actually makes a pretty big difference with a topic like this, and a topic this big and potentially this impactful. But anyway, all that stuff aside, let's actually talk about the goods so I can kind of share my perspective and opinion on all this, because this is crazy. And I know, again, because I'm 2 days late here, you guys obviously know the details. We're talking about this rumor that seems incredibly substantiated that Nintendo is actually planning some kind of upgraded Switch next year, 2019, within that third-year window of the Switch's life. I mean, I shouldn't say within the third-year window. It's in year 3, but it will only be 2.5 years after the console has launched, if that makes sense. So it's crazy because the idea of doing it right now seems pretty early. And as far as what we might be able to expect from this thing, if it's even real, some of the discussions around it sound really interesting. Some of it sound kind of like a waste of time, and that's kind of why it's interesting to discuss. So news of this story first broke through the Wall Street Journal, and I have to say, as much as I absolutely despise the Wall Street Journal, there is unfortunately no doubt that it is a pretty credible resource. I guess it was Wall Street Journal of Japan. I didn't actually know that they had like a Japanese outlet, but apparently they do, and this first came from them, which then made it to the North American or Western version of Wall Street Journal, which then made it to a lot of the bigger sites and bigger YouTubers and whatnot. Even IGN and GameSpot are reporting on this, and again, your opinions of all these places aside, whether it's Wall Street Journal or IGN or whatever, it's about how large and reputable they are as far as news. And so once all of these different sites start talking about this and covering it, then there's something to it. It's not just made up like a fart in the wind, and it's like some weird Redditor just grabbed it, made up a story on a Reddit post, and now the whole internet's freaking out. To be fair, sometimes that happens, and all of us on YouTube end up talking about it, and sometimes those even turn out to be true, and a lot of times they turn out to be absolutely nothing. However, this seems like something pretty big, which is why everyone and their mom has been talking about it. And from the Wall Street Journal came a report that, like I said, Nintendo actually is looking at releasing an upgraded Switch next year. Now, there aren't a lot of full details on this rumor, which of course this may not even be true, or Nintendo may end up deciding not to do this. There aren't a lot of details, but what's mostly been discussed is that what they're looking at doing is improving the quality of the screen on the Switch itself, like the actual touch screen and the screen of the console, as well as improving the battery life and some of like its performance output or something. You know, like small minor tweaks, nothing necessarily to the level of like what the PS4 Pro or the Xbox One X did for their respective consoles, because clearly as soon as you hear the idea of a Nintendo Switch upgrade, I think that's one of the first things that we all picture in our brain is, oh my god, they're going to do a Switch Pro, they're going to do a Switch Plus, a Switch Extra, a Super Switch, whatever name you want to tack onto it, something like an actual mid-gen refresh that has a significant increase in its overall performance and output. But again, the couple of things being discussed right now have less to do with that and more to do with like some small, minor, like what some people call quality of life improvements. That seems to be what people are talking about. So what do I think about this? I mean, here's the thing. Here's the main thing I want to say to kind of start some of my thoughts on this whole idea. I am tending to believe this, and a lot of times with rumors like these, even when I enjoy discussing them because it's fun to discuss, a lot of times I'm willing to tell you that there's a huge reason to believe that it might not happen, it might not be real, whatever the story or rumor is, it's interesting, but there's a huge chance it's not real. Like the Star Fox retro rumor, for example, stuff like that. This one, though, the way this story blew up and the source it came from and then the other sources now reporting on it, I'm not going to tell you that it's fact, and I certainly don't know anything behind the scenes on this one, even though I do know people who probably have inside info. I haven't been tapping any of them. At the end of the day, looking at the details and the sources, this just feels like something that isn't made up, isn't coming from nowhere, isn't a smokescreen. This feels like one of those things that turns out to be real. Do you guys remember 2 years ago when Eurogamer had this thing about the Nintendo NX was like a weird screen with detachable controllers, and there was a little mock-up, and it was the most ridiculous thing we'd all seen, even though a lot of us, on YouTube and stuff talked about it and were interested in the idea. We all thought it was complete nonsense. I absolutely thought it was nonsense. I thought it was interesting, but I didn't believe it. I was like, this is nothing Nintendo would ever do, and clearly we were all wrong. Clearly Eurogamer was right, and so there are things that turn out to be real no matter how insane they sound. And what's interesting about the idea of an upgraded Switch is at the end of the day, it actually doesn't sound that insane, because doing stuff like this, whether it's a small upgrade like what's being reported or the bigger version upgrade like a PS4 Pro or an Xbox One X, they are slowly becoming the norm. This isn't new to do, and I have discussed, and many people have discussed, the idea of Nintendo doing something to the Switch to change it or upgrade it or improve it or alter it in some way. Now, there's another reason why I'm tending to believe this and think that this is absolutely not made up and there is something substantial to this rumor. And it's more than just the fact that it feels right because of like the sources and the kind of story that it is. It's because I can absolutely see the motivation and the reasoning behind why Nintendo would do it. Now, of course, the when is a little bit questionable. Does it make sense for them to do it as early as next year like the story suggests? Maybe, maybe not. But recent opinions that I've had about when we would see the PS5 and Xbox One have actually changed. Even 4 or 5 months ago, I thought we wouldn't see or hear from those consoles until 2020. However, my opinion specifically on the PlayStation 5 has been changing the last couple of weeks. For myself, once Sony canceled the PlayStation experience in December because they were like, we don't have all the right kind of new stuff to show, it doesn't make sense, it would be a waste of time, that kind of put the idea in my head that maybe the PlayStation 5 is meant to be revealed next year. Maybe launched, but I don't want to believe that the PS5 would launch next year necessarily. But I feel like, if anything, there's a very good chance that it will at least be revealed, like in Q1 or Q2 of 2019. With the possibility of it releasing in 2019 as well, although I think it's still way too early, so I hope they don't do that. Either way, I feel like next year is the year where serious rumblings and possible confirmations from Sony and Microsoft themselves are coming about their next generation consoles. And with that, makes me realize, and I've said this on videos about a Nintendo Switch upgrade before, I feel like if that's truly happening, Nintendo absolutely cannot not have an answer. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, the Switch is great. I love it. It's one of my favorite consoles ever. It's doing incredibly well with sales and all that. But at the same time, as great as it is, it's not as powerful as the current consoles it competes against. And once something as astronomically massive in capability, like a PlayStation 5 and a next Xbox, launch or are discussed or are being marketed and promoted by Sony and Microsoft, the Switch, as much as we love it as a Nintendo device, can't compete. It just can't. And I can say that as the world's biggest Switch fan, but when you look at things realistically, it's not going to be, it's going to be in a totally different league than what those consoles are doing. And I think that Nintendo, as much as they want to move to the beat of their own drum, which is great, I think that they also know they have to be able to somewhat be on a level of parity with Sony and Microsoft. They can't ignore them outright. They can avoid them, they can sidestep them and sort of dance around them to do their own thing and carve out their own market like they've been doing for years, and successfully so, but they can't outright ignore them. Just like Sony and Microsoft can't outright ignore Nintendo just because Nintendo does do those weird things. They're all still in the same space, they're all playing in the same sandbox, and they can be friends and cordial with each other, but at the same time, there's a level of competition. And once Sony and Microsoft come out with a PS5 and a next Xbox, if that's on the horizon, I think Nintendo would know what's on the horizon, and I think it's why they know they've got to do something to the Switch to change it up, make it more appealing to a lot of people, to keep the positive sales momentum going and have some kind of answer to Sony and Microsoft. In fact, from what I understand, part of this report from the Wall Street Journal is that Nintendo is a little bit concerned about the future coming from Sony and Microsoft and realize that they need to do something to kind of keep pace with them. So upgrading the Switch might be a great way to do that. Not to mention that also part of this story is while Switch sales have not slowed to the point of being bad, it's obviously not moving at this insane pace like it was in the first year and a half when it was the most unstoppable machine and was breaking records and all this. It's kind of tapered down, which I think, most logical thinking adults knew would happen. It was never going to be unstoppable forever. And here we are at the point where it seems like that's happening. Nintendo knows that that's happening. And they also know they've got a slow 2018 and they've got great games coming up in 2019, so the pace is going to pick up. But when you combine a slowing pace with the possibility, this is just my conjecture to be fair, this isn't part of a story, but my conjecture that there is possible, incoming threat of Sony and Microsoft new machines, that's part of why Nintendo is motivated to want to do something to sort of change up the Switch hardware. So that brings us to the next, and really, I guess the last big piece to discuss here, is what they're looking on upgrading the Switch with and how they're trying to change it, how much, how little, and if it's even going to make a difference. So are they going to do a minor upgrade like what they did with the new 3DS, where it improved some of the performance and the capability and the processing? They added a couple of minor features like, the little right analog nub, whatever that thing is called, and a couple of other things. Or are they going to do something significant, like the Switch equivalent to a PS4 Pro or a One X, like I said? That is the tricky thing. Going back to the report, which apparently discusses, like I said, for the most part, the battery life and the quality of the screen, they want to make it more like, modern, cell phones, I guess. If that's all they're trying to do, I have to admit that that's probably, the battery life is something that I'm interested in. The screen to me seems like a waste of time. If it's not improving the resolution, and maybe it is improving the resolution, but I haven't heard that from any of the reports and videos and stuff that I've researched on this. So we'll look at it in two ways. If they're looking at performing the resolution of the screen, then that's fine. I would say that's totally worthy and it's worth its time. If they're not doing that, but they're just trying to improve the quality, I guess, I don't know, the brightness, they want to make it an OLED screen, and I don't really know, you guys know, I'm not tech savvy, so I'm not even going to try to talk about that part. I guess they just want to make it a better quality screen with better touch and better visuals without maybe upgrading the resolution. To me, I could care less. That's a waste of time. There's no reason to change the Switch for that. And there's no reason to charge people more money for that upgraded Switch if that's the overall purpose. Really, I mean, that's just how I feel. However, there is one minor upgrade that I would like and would make me consider wanting to buy a new Switch. And that would be if they improved the heat of the system. I've talked about this before. I hate how hot the Switch gets. It's very awkward and uncomfortable to me. I've always got a fan blowing on it when it's in my dock. And I don't like that. I feel like that's part of the reason that the battery chews down so quickly, and maybe the performance of the Switch sometimes isn't as good as it could be. And so if changing the quality of the battery, the screen, and the performance and the heat output of the machine is possible, that to me sounds great. Those are the perfect quality of life adjustments that I would like to see, on top of bigger or more comfortable Joy-Cons. And I can deal without that, but I sure would like to see something like that happen. So that's kind of the stuff that I would like to see personally. I don't need more power and graphics out of my Switch to enjoy it for many years to come still. However, what I will say is that if what Nintendo is trying to do is pick up momentum of sales and possibly combat Sony and Microsoft with incoming new machines, I would have to admit that doing those minor upgrades won't make a difference. I feel like it's a waste of time. I don't think it's going to change the course or the fate of sales and momentum of the Switch to do something like that. If they want to change the course and fate, like I said, of the Switch, it's got to be something significant, something flashy, something full of buzzwords, something that makes a huge difference, and that would be a bigger upgrade to better graphics, more processing power, and the rumor about 4K. That was this whole conversation a month or two ago about a 4K Nintendo Switch that I guess docked would do 4K. And so if that's what they were looking at doing, while it's not something I need out of the Switch, I think it would be the smarter play. I think it would be more appealing to people, and I think it would make it a more worthy competitor to Sony and Microsoft's current machines, let alone a possible PS5 and next Xbox. Now, of course, with that idea, and with the rumor of it possibly being so powerful like a PS4 Pro, like a big processing power upgrade to the current Switch, comes a really tricky problem. Because again, part of this rumor, even going back a month or so ago, was that this new upgraded 4K Switch would help Nintendo court more third-party games and third-party developers, which they've already done a great job with the Switch on as it is, but could also create a situation where some games would come third-party to this new Switch that would be exclusive to that new Switch. And while this new one would be backwards compatible with regular Switch stuff, it would also get some exclusive third-party games that wouldn't play on this original launch day Switch. That to me is a huge mistake, and it goes way against, I think, what Nintendo's MO and overall mantra with the Switch truly was. Plus, there's even talk about some games being only usable when docked and not even in portable mode, if we're talking about really graphically intensive games coming to an upgraded Switch. And so the waters get really muddy, and the whole business model of the Switch kind of starts to break, in my opinion, once we start looking at things like that and talking about exclusive games to this Switch but not the other one, some games working only docked but not portable. It's just like, whoa, that is a mess. You're alienating people, you're screwing up your market, and you're going to probably end up dooming the Switch going forward if you really start to do that. Again, in my opinion, as much as I want to have a game like Resident Evil 2 or what have you, Grand Theft Auto 6 come to the Switch, I wouldn't want it to happen in that way with an upgraded Switch for $399. That part's just not interesting to me. So I would hope that that wouldn't be what would come along with an upgraded Switch if that's their plan. And so this whole story is really tricky. I don't want to say that it's messy, but it's just insane. Like, there's a lot to it. And while I probably would be talking about this, even if it was something as small as like a Reddit post where just smaller sites like Nintendo Life and My Nintendo News or whatever picked it up, yeah, sure, I might still make a video on it, and I'm sure a lot of people would be talking about it. But to me, like I said in the beginning of this video, the big X factor about this and why it's really a fascinating story is because bigger sites, including a non-gaming focused site, Wall Street Journal, broke the story. And then, like I said, love them or hate them, sites as big as IGN and GameSpot also talking about it, even though, yes, they're talking about it as a rumor, that adds more credence to it. That means it's not a nothing story to me. Yeah, we may never see it, and who knows what that means behind the scenes if we never see it. Maybe it was never real, or maybe Nintendo changes their mind. I mean, who even knows? Next year is going to give us all the details on what's going on here, but it's still interesting because reputable sources are discussing it. There's even part of a rumor, and I heard this, I believe it was from Review Tech USA's awesome video on this, by the way. I cannot recommend enough that you listen to his video because he talks about insider information that he has without giving up his sources. It was great. Probably one of my favorite videos I've seen on the topic, and I mean, you really should check it out. And I think he was the one that mentioned that very possibly Nintendo actually leaked this on purpose, probably to that Japanese outlet of the Wall Street Journal. So none of that's substantiated, it's just a discussion, it was an idea he put out there. He maybe heard it from one of his sources. I can't really say, I don't know those details, but it was an interesting thing to hear, and because the story is so frickin' wacky, it's like, I mean, anything is possible, I guess, at this point. So, I don't know, man. To summarize, like I said, I do tend to believe this. I think there's something to this. I think that, yes, Nintendo is working on something behind the scenes to change up the Switch. How they're going to do it, I don't know. There's a lot of things to discuss. I have more ideas to discuss, and I'm probably going to address those in another video, maybe the very next video I make. This one is long enough, and there's enough to discuss as is, so I don't really need to add any more to it. That's my feelings, man. That's what's going on here. This is nuts. What do you guys think? Do you believe this? Do you not believe this? If you believe this, what kind of upgrade to the Switch do you see coming? And do you think it's a smart idea? Or do you think it's a bad idea? Do you think it plays into a PlayStation 5 and Xbox? Or do you think that it doesn't and it's just Nintendo doing its own thing? It's just a lot. There's a lot to discuss here, man. This is crazy. But it's interesting, and it sure as hell is fun to talk about, man. And that's why I love doing this. So please share your opinions below. All opinions are welcome here as always. And that is it for me. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Ro2R Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.